Ethan sat on the porch, staring at the golden sunlight fading over the yard. His thoughts tangled with confusion and restlessness, memories from the past few months replaying in his mind as he tried to understand the distance he always felt around his stepmom, Claire, a woman whose presence was calming yet distant, someone he had always respected but never truly known. And that day, as he nursed a lukewarm cup of tea, he saw her appear at the back door, a hesitant knock breaking the quiet, and he noticed something unusual in her eyes, a vulnerability that made him pause and put down his cup, sensing that whatever she wanted might be more than a simple request. Yet curiosity and a sense of duty pushed him to follow her inside, stepping into the familiar kitchen that smelled faintly of vanilla and old wood, a space that had always seemed orderly and safe but now carried a strange tension. And Claire's voice was soft, almost fragile, as she asked him to help her organize some boxes, her hands slightly shaking as she indicated a pile of old photographs and letters that had been tucked away for years. And Ethan, feeling a mixture of concern and intrigue, knelt to pick up the first box, the weight of its contents heavier than he expected, filled with memories he had never witnessed. And as he handed her the photographs, he noticed how her fingers lingered over them, tracing edges and corners with a tenderness that spoke of nostalgia and perhaps sorrow. And she began talking, softly at first, about the past, stories of her younger years that revealed a life he had never imagined, tales of friends long gone, loves lost, dreams that had been put aside for responsibilities. And Ethan listened, drawn into a world he had only glimpsed through small, fragmented stories she had told him before. A world where Claire was not just the stepmom he had accepted as part of his life but a young woman with passions, mistakes, joys, and heartbreak. And as she spoke, her voice carrying a subtle quiver, he realized how much he had misunderstood her, how he had never truly looked beyond the surface of her calm, composed exterior. And as they continued sifting through the boxes, laughter mingled with quiet sighs, stories flowing back and forth like a gentle current, and he noticed moments where her eyes met his, not in the casual way she had always done, but with an intensity that made his chest tighten and a strange warmth spread through him. And for a moment he almost dropped a photograph when he felt the brush of her hand against his, an accidental touch that lingered just a fraction longer than expected. And Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, curiosity, empathy, and something that bordered on longing, a recognition that the bond they had always shared was shifting into something more layered and complex, something he couldn't yet name. And Claire, sensing his attention, paused, smiled softly, and shook her head as if to clear a thought. But the moment remained suspended in the air, heavy with unspoken words, and then she reached for a box she had left at the corner, one that seemed older and more fragile than the others, covered in dust and cobwebs. And when she opened it, she pulled out a letter, yellowed and brittle with age, and her hands trembled slightly as she held it. And Ethan noticed the way her eyes softened, a distant look crossing her face, a memory she had not shared before, a story locked away for decades. And as she began reading aloud, he realized it was addressed to someone named Michael, a name he didn't recognize, and the words she read were filled with emotion, longing, regret, and passion, telling a story of a love that had shaped her but ended in heartbreak, a life-altering love that had been torn apart by circumstance and decisions made long before Ethan existed. And he listened, mesmerized, feeling a pull towards her vulnerability, sensing a depth to her he had never seen, a fragile strength hidden beneath her composed exterior. And the air between them felt different, charged in a quiet way, as if the house itself recognized the shift, the closeness of shared secrets, the intimacy of stories told with honesty. And as the letter ended, Ethan felt the weight of her emotions pressing gently on his chest, a sense of understanding blossoming that he had never experienced before. And he realized that this simple request to help organize old boxes had become something far more significant, a doorway into her past, a window into her heart. And in that moment, he felt a mixture of awe and tenderness, knowing that the relationship they shared was changing, evolving into something deeper, complicated, and profoundly human. And Claire, looking at him with eyes that reflected years of hidden stories, seemed to hesitate, as if she wanted to say more but feared the consequences. And Ethan, sensing the hesitation, waited patiently, heart pounding, realizing that life had unexpectedly handed him a moment of connection he would never forget. And outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced across the floor as the quiet hum of the evening settled in, and the world seemed to hold its breath along with them, a delicate pause before the next revelation, before the next secret, before the next step in a story that was only beginning to unfold. And as Ethan placed the letter gently back into the box, he felt the air shift, the tension of unspoken emotions lingering, and he knew that whatever had started as a simple favor had turned into a journey into understanding, empathy, and a subtle, growing bond that neither of them could yet define. But both would feel, both would carry, and both would remember, a quiet, emotional connection born from trust, stories, and the fragile honesty of a woman opening her heart to the stepson who had always seen her but never truly known her. Ethan felt a strange heaviness in the air as he watched Claire carefully set the letter back into the box, her hands lingering over it as if touching it would somehow let her relive the past, and the curiosity that had been growing inside him for weeks surged into something more intense, a need to understand her, to see beyond the composed, gentle woman he had always known into the heart of someone who had loved and lost in ways he could only imagine. And when Claire looked up, her eyes met his with a softness that made him swallow hard, a mixture of sorrow and nostalgia reflected in her gaze, and she hesitated before speaking, finally admitting that there were more letters and journals tucked away in the attic, writings she had never dared show anyone, chronicling a life full of love, heartbreak, and choices she regretted but could not undo. And Ethan, feeling a surge of determination, offered to help her gather them, sensing that this journey into her past was more than just organizing old papers. It was a passage into understanding who she truly was, the person beneath the stepmom role, the woman whose experiences had shaped every decision, every expression, every quiet moment of her life. And as they carried the boxes together, their hands brushed occasionally, small accidental touches that made Ethan's heart race and sent a warm, confusing wave of emotion through him, and Claire seemed aware of it too, glancing up with a subtle smile, but quickly returning her attention to the task at hand, as though both of them knew that the attic held more than just letters. It held a connection, a fragile, growing bond built on honesty and vulnerability. And when they finally reached the dusty space, Ethan felt a shiver of anticipation, the air thick with the scent of old wood and paper, and Claire began opening trunks, revealing journals filled with thoughts and memories that spanned decades, entries describing love, longing, excitement, and heartbreak, a side of her that he had never seen, stories of relationships lost to time, of dreams she had fought for and sacrificed, of moments of joy and moments of despair. And Ethan felt his heart ache for her, for the girl she had been and the woman she had become, the strength she had shown and the loneliness she had endured. And as Claire read aloud a passage from one journal, describing a love she had been forced to leave behind, Ethan felt a mix of admiration and a strange, confusing attraction, not merely physical but emotional, a desire to understand and comfort, to connect. And he realized that the simple stepmom-stepson relationship he had known all his life was shifting, deepening in ways that were complicated but undeniable. And as they continued through the journals, laughter and occasional tears punctuating the quiet of the attic, Ethan felt closer to her than he had ever been, a silent acknowledgement passing between them that the walls they had built around themselves were beginning to crumble, revealing vulnerability, longing, and trust. And Claire, noticing his attention, paused once, her eyes locking with his in a way that made him catch his breath, a moment heavy with emotion, unspoken words, and a shared understanding that neither dared to name aloud. Yet both recognized. And as the afternoon faded into early evening, the golden light streaming through the small attic window illuminated dust particles dancing in the air, giving the space a magical, intimate feeling, a sense that this moment, this sharing of history, could change everything between them. And Ethan felt a quiet ache, a longing he did not yet fully understand, a mixture of empathy, admiration, and the stirrings of something tender, something human and unavoidable. And Claire, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, placed a hand on a journal as if grounding herself, and then hesitated, finally confessing that the story of her past had more layers, more truths that were difficult to speak, that she had loved deeply but had always carried the consequences of choices made long ago. And Ethan listened, heart pounding, aware of the weight of her words, the emotional depth they carried. And as she spoke, describing the pain of lost love and missed chances, he realized that her strength and vulnerability were intertwined, making her more human, more beautiful in a way that went beyond appearances. And when she reached for a photograph of someone she had once loved, her fingers brushing against his hand again, a spark of something unspoken passed between them, a subtle intensity that neither ignored. And Ethan's mind raced, not with temptation but with compassion, connection, and a quiet awe at the woman sitting beside him, A woman who had endured, loved, and lost. Yet still remained open, still brave enough to share her heart. And as Claire described a particularly painful memory, tears glimmering in her eyes, Ethan instinctively offered a comforting smile, a soft word, a presence that spoke of care and understanding, and in that moment, the attic seemed to shrink around them, the world outside fading, leaving only the two of them in the fragile intimacy of shared stories, and Ethan felt an emotion he had never recognized before. A mixture of protectiveness, admiration, and longing, complicated and confusing yet tender, and Claire, sensing the closeness, shifted slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and Ethan's gaze followed, captivated not by appearance but by the essence of her, the courage it took to reveal herself so fully, and as the hours passed, they uncovered more letters and journals, each one peeling back layers of Claire's past, revealing dreams, disappointments, loves, heartbreaks, and quiet victories, and, with each revelation, Ethan's understanding of her deepened, and he felt a growing connection, an invisible thread weaving between them, stronger than familial obligation, more profound than casual companionship, yet delicate and careful, requiring respect, patience, and emotional honesty. And when Claire paused to rest, her eyes meeting his once more, Ethan realized that the bond forming between them was unspoken but undeniable. A quiet intensity, a subtle tension, a mutual recognition of shared vulnerability and emotional resonance. And as night fell and the first stars appeared through the attic window, their surroundings dimmed but the emotional light between them glowed stronger, a gentle, unspoken acknowledgement that what began as helping her organize old boxes had transformed into an intimate exploration of trust, history, and feelings neither had anticipated. And Ethan, leaving the attic that night with a heavy but enlightened heart, carried with him the depth of Claire's experiences, the fragility of her honesty, and the beginnings of an emotional bond that would change how he saw her, how he felt about her, and how their relationship would evolve in the quiet days to come. And both of them, in their own ways, understood that the journey had only just begun, that the connection between them, tender, complicated, and emotionally charged, would continue to grow, revealing truths, stirring emotions, and creating moments of longing, empathy, and mutual understanding that neither could ignore, a delicate dance of hearts learning to see each other fully. And as Ethan lay awake that night, memories of Claire's voice, her gaze, her stories, and the faint brush of her hand against his replayed endlessly in his mind, leaving him both unsettled and comforted, aware that this day, this simple request to help, had become the start of a chapter neither had expected, a chapter filled with emotional intimacy, shared vulnerabilities, and a subtle, slowly blossoming bond that would shape the days and weeks to come. And the story between them, unspoken yet deeply felt, hovered in the quiet, promising more revelations, more understanding. And as the days passed, Ethan found himself thinking about Claire constantly, the memories from the attic lingering in his mind, replaying the sound of her voice reading her old letters, the intensity of her gaze, and the quiet vulnerability she had revealed. And each time he saw her, whether in the kitchen making tea or in the living room organizing books, there was a subtle shift, a gentle tension, an unspoken connection that neither could ignore, a delicate dance of emotions that grew stronger with every shared story and every fleeting touch. And one evening, as the sky turned a soft amber and the house was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, Claire asked Ethan to sit with her in the garden, a place they had both always found comforting yet had never explored together in this intimate way. And as they settled on the worn wooden bench surrounded by flowering plants and the gentle rustle of leaves, she began to speak again, her voice quieter than usual, tinged with a mixture of sadness and hope, recounting the challenges she had faced as a young woman, the mistakes she had made, the love she had lost, and the dreams she had set aside for family and responsibility. And Ethan listened intently, feeling an ache in his chest for the woman who had endured so much and yet remained so kind, so composed, so profoundly human. And as Claire continued, describing moments of loneliness, longing, and heartache, he realized that his feelings for her had shifted into something deeper, more complex, a mixture of admiration, empathy, protectiveness, and an emotional yearning he could not yet fully define. And he noticed how her hands moved when she spoke, sometimes trembling slightly, sometimes resting gently on her lap, and how her eyes, so often calm and distant, now held an intensity that made him catch his breath, the unspoken words between them growing heavier with each passing second. And when she paused to look at him, a faint, almost imperceptible blush on her cheeks, Ethan felt the fragile thread of connection tighten, the subtle energy between them palpable, as if the air itself recognized the emotional bond that had formed through shared stories, trust and vulnerability, and he wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to tell her that he understood, that he cared, but the right words eluded him, leaving only the quiet intensity of the moment, and Claire, sensing his presence and perhaps his emotions, smiled softly, a mix of gratitude, sadness and something more tender, something that spoke of acknowledgement and understanding, and in that moment, Ethan realized that the bond they shared had transformed, evolving beyond the simple labels of stepmom and stepson into something uniquely intimate, emotionally charged and deeply human. A connection built not on romance alone but on empathy, trust, and shared vulnerability. And as they continued to sit in the fading sunlight, talking in whispers about hopes, fears, and dreams, the world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them, and the fragile, profound intimacy of hearts beginning to recognize each other fully. And later, when they moved back inside to the living room, the soft hum of the evening wrapping around them, Ethan noticed the way Claire lingered when she walked past him, the way her hand occasionally brushed against his, the small glances that seemed to linger a second too long, and he felt a mixture of anticipation and quiet longing, a realization that their relationship had entered a new phase, one filled with emotional tension, gentle attraction, and the subtle, unspoken understanding that they were no longer simply stepmom and stepson but two people discovering the depth of human connection together. And as the week went on, Ethan found himself drawn to moments alone with Claire, whether helping her sort through old keepsakes, sharing quiet meals, or simply sitting in companionable silence, and each interaction carried a new weight, a delicate, unspoken charge that neither could ignore. And during one evening, as rain softly tapped against the windows, Claire shared a particularly intimate story from her past, describing a moment when she had felt completely lost yet found a small flicker of hope, and Ethan, moved by her honesty, reached out instinctively to place a comforting hand over hers, and the touch lingered, warm and reassuring, creating a spark neither had expected, a recognition of mutual vulnerability and emotional closeness. And as the storm outside continued, they shared memories, thoughts, and feelings they had never voiced, the conversation flowing naturally, a rhythm forming between them that was both soothing and exhilarating. And Ethan realized that he had come to deeply admire Claire not just for her beauty or kindness but for her strength, resilience, and the courage to share her heart. And Claire in turn seemed to sense his understanding, his empathy, and perhaps the tender stirrings of feelings that mirrored her own. And though neither spoke of it directly, the connection was undeniable, a quiet intimacy that filled the room with a warmth that both comforted and unsettled. And in the following days, their bond continued to grow, small moments adding weight to the unspoken truth between them. The way Claire would glance at him while cooking, the soft tone of her voice when asking for help, the way Ethan would instinctively offer support, the brush of hands reaching for the same book or photograph, and each gesture carried meaning, a subtle acknowledgement of the emotional closeness that had taken root. And one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan and Claire found themselves in the attic once more, the space now familiar yet charged with memory and emotion, going through more journals, letters, and photographs, each piece revealing layers of Claire's life and shaping Ethan's understanding of her, of the person she had been, the woman she had become, and the quiet desire she had never expressed. And as they worked side by side, their hands occasionally brushing, their laughter mingling with moments of silence, Ethan felt the intensity of the bond they had built, fragile yet powerful, emotional yet tender. And when Claire paused to read a particularly moving entry from a journal, describing a dream she had abandoned for family obligations, Ethan looked at her with admiration, his heart swelling with empathy and a protective longing, a desire to be close, to comfort, and to understand completely. And Claire, catching his gaze, felt the same mix of emotions, a tender recognition that their relationship had changed, and though they could not yet name it, they both sensed the depth of the connection forming, a bond built on shared vulnerability, trust, and a quiet, emotional intimacy that was neither simple nor fleeting. And as night fell, the attic bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp, Ethan and Claire paused to sit together, the journals and letters spread around them, and for a long moment, they simply looked at each other, communicating without words, hearts quietly acknowledging the journey they had undertaken together, the emotional closeness that had grown beyond labels, and the subtle, growing attraction that neither could ignore yet both respected. and as they finally descended from the attic into the calm of the night, a peaceful tension between them lingered, a sense of anticipation and emotional resonance, a recognition that the story of their bond, of their connection, of the delicate, heartfelt intimacy they had built, was only just beginning. And Ethan, lying awake that night, replayed every detail in his mind. The sound of Claire's voice, the warmth of her presence, the intensity in her eyes, the gentle brush of her hand, and the shared laughter and sorrow, and he realized that he had been forever changed by the experience, that his understanding of Claire, of love, of vulnerability, and of human connection had deepened in ways he had never imagined. And Claire too lay awake, reflecting on the moments shared, the emotions stirred, the trust given, and the gentle awakening of feelings she had long kept hidden, and both understood, in their separate thoughts yet shared in spirit, that life had granted them something rare, tender and profound, a connection built on emotional honesty, empathy, and a slow, deep blossoming of human intimacy, a bond that would continue to grow, to challenge, to comfort, and to stir their hearts, a story of understanding, longing, and emotional resonance that neither would forget, a story that began with a simple request and evolved into the discovery of the heart, the quiet power of trust, and the beauty of two souls recognizing each other fully, tenderly, and irrevocably. And as they each drifted into sleep, the unspoken promise of connection, of understanding, and of emotional closeness lingered between them, a soft, enduring bond that would shape their days and hearts, a journey that had begun in curiosity and respect, grown through honesty and shared vulnerability, and now rested in the quiet, gentle space of recognition, intimacy, and the tender complexity of human emotion. The fragile beauty of connection forged through empathy, honesty, and the gentle exploration of the heart.